Well, good afternoon. My name is Drew Bond, and I am the president and CEO of the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions, or C3 Solutions, as we like to call ourselves. This interview is actually a Right Voices interview that we're doing as a part of an ongoing educational series where we get the chance to talk to some of the most notable and experienced and just some of the smartest people around the world on all things climate, energy, and the environment. And C3 Solutions is a nonprofit educational organization where we're looking to highlight real free market solutions to those problems and the challenges and the opportunities associated with climate, energy, and the environment. And so check us out on our news magazine site, c3newsmag.com. Please share us on social media and follow our podcast. I know that you'll enjoy this conversation today because it's a real honor to have with us Bud Albright. And so Bud is the president and CEO of the United States Nuclear Industry Council. And full disclosure, Bud and I worked together at the Department of Energy years ago. He was then one of my many bosses. He was the Undersecretary of Energy, and he came to that role with a whole lot of experience, having been the staff director at the Energy and Commerce Committee on the House side. And so in addition to a lot of other things he's done in his life. So just a really, really wise man, a great colleague, and a dear friend. And so with that, I'll just say, Bud, it's so good to see you. And how are you today?
Drew, thank you. That was high praise coming from someone I respect greatly. I appreciate that. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. As we talked earlier, had a little bout with COVID. I was one of those breakthrough cases, and it's not fun. I urge everybody to get those vaccines. I don't want to stir up controversy here, Drew. But anyway, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you're better, and we're pro-vaccine, so no worries there. Um,
Good.
and so, I'm betting though, Bud, that most people have never heard of, no offense, but they probably never heard of the United States Nuclear Industry Council. And so, what is that, and how did you find your way into this role as president and CEO?
Well, as you mentioned, I was undersecretary at Department of Energy, which I won't bore you with the details, but that pretty much led me to chairman of the board of this organization. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, our then president, David Bleed, died at a young age, very unexpectedly.
Hmm.
And I was asked to step in on a temporary basis. After a few months, I was asked if I would stay on a more permanent temporary basis. I told them that one of my goals is to not stay in Washington my entire life. So I do hope at some point to step away. But I became interested in this because I've always been a firm believer in the nuclear industry and know its many, many benefits that so far outweigh the overhyped negative aspects. But this is the new technology, the smaller, safer, more robust even technology that uses new fuels, relies on gravity and other walk-away safe means of ensuring that a plant doesn't reach super criticality, which means it doesn't overheat. So we have about 80, over 80 members now. Virtually everybody who is involved in the advanced nuclear technology advancement is a member, and we have big members: GE, Duke, Westinghouse. So we have some of the big guys, and we have some of the smaller guys that you've never heard of. And speaking of, but never heard of us, I think one of the reasons is this: while this new technology has been developing for decades, it is only really come into its own over the last 10 years or so. And we're now on the cusp of demonstrating the new technologies in various locations, some of the national labs. in conjunction in part with some military operations, some universities. So we're really on the cusp of full development, and we certainly think and hope full deployment of this newer technology.
Yeah, that is, it's exciting to hear that there's 80 companies involved in your council, because, I mean, last time I checked, I think there's, only about 100 nuclear reactors around the country. Now, I know that's the old school, older technology, but the fact that we've got 80 companies involved in this, is pretty encouraging, because I think, one of the things that we think a lot about at C3, and try and promote on our news magazine is new technology pathways and energy innovation, and how do you get from here to there, reduce your carbon footprint, reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, and do it in a way that's good for the U.S. economy, frankly, but also good for the world. And so, I guess that leads to my question of, a lot of the conversations we have around clean energy, in my mind, you can't really have a holistic solution of a path to the future without nuclear being a part of the clean energy mix. But I'm just kind of wondering how you think about that. How does the industry think about that? And then maybe even how do you, when you encounter other folks out in the public, are they thinking that way?
Well, I think certainly more and more people are recognizing that we can't get there being reaching any of the goals that have been set, or really even a significant reduction in carbon emissions through generation of electricity without nuclear. It's just simply not there from a scientific and numbers perspective. Some of our opponents of old, a number in the environmental community, are recognizing now that we need nuclear, that nuclear is safe. And you and I referred to some of the existing plants as old technology, and I hate to make it old versus new, but we are older, and they are. I mean, we're newer, and they're older and proven. I don't mean anything pejorative at all by referring to them as old. The big difference is the size of the existing plants and the operation, the fuels used, and the pressure that these plants of necessity have to operate. The newer fuels, and it's the fuel development that makes these newer plants, this advanced technology, different. So these fuels can operate and can generate electricity at very, very low atmospheric pressure. So many of the plants being designed operate at atmospheric pressure or at just 1 or 2 pounds. So you don't have that fear of reaching criticality and having, even as remote as it is, having a release of any atomic energy, nuclear energy. So radiation. So, that's one of the big benefits. And one of the other benefits is that these plants, we call it walk away safe. And by that, many of them rely on gravity as a shutdown system. So if anything goes wrong, as long as gravity works, so as long as if you hold a rock and let go of it, it hits the ground and doesn't fly up to the second floor, these plants are safe. Many of them may not even need operators, although I suspect we'll use operators, just public perception. But do they absolutely have to have an operator? Probably not.
Yeah.
And then the 1 or 2 more quick things, because they're smaller, and when I say smaller, significantly smaller, some can generate as little as a megawatt of electricity. When you think of a megawatt, you think of, they say 1,000 homes. I'd say 750 of our homes. But if you think of a place, places in India, places in Africa, places around the world where over 2 billion people don't have electricity, the ability to manufacture a nuclear reactor in a facility. So these are modularly built. Ship it to a location that doesn't have electricity, put it in the ground, literally, and immediately have electricity that you don't have to really worry about. Of course, you still have to have distribution lines, but this will be a huge boon and benefit to the world at large.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so fascinating to me because I think, there's probably a lot of people in America that actually get their electricity from a nuclear power plant and may not know it because they're just so quiet and clean.
We're I think now, Drew, we've supplied 53% of the clean energy, zero emission energy in the United States.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So 53% of the clean energy in the United States comes from nuclear energy.
Yes.
That's not the newer advanced technology. Those are existing power plants, right, that have been operating for 10, well, a lot longer than 10 years, right? Probably 50 years, or how long did I hate to call it old.
80, 90
Yeah.
years or more.
Okay. So 80,
Many of them are being relicensed now to go to 90, 60, 80, 90 years.
yeah.
And I mean, we don't know exactly how long, but it's very promising that they can go for quite a while,
Yeah.
which of course makes them much more economically reasonable, lowering costs of electricity as opposed to raising costs, and which is always a good thing for everyone.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, speaking of the existing generation, we're under a lot of pressure in various states to shut plants down that are perfectly good plants. Um, and that's something I know Congress is looking at and others, but we really do. We face, I think, a critical situation in the potential for loss of those plants.
Yeah, so I mean, how does the industry deal with that? Because I mean, my question, I guess, is to your point. You were talking earlier about the criticality, right? And the newer advanced modular technologies are essentially, I hate to use the words fail safe, but they're essentially fail safe, and that if it gets near the criticality where it's a danger zone, right? Then it shuts itself down, and and it feels like kind of that's an interesting analogy for kind of the political landscape here in the United States, right? And that we kind of reached this criticality, moment or moments over the course of 10 years or so where we're in danger of shutting the industry down
Yeah.
because oftentimes of fears that people have that are perhaps misplaced or over exaggerated. But maybe just talk a little bit about that because I think obviously a big issue on people's minds when you ask them about nuclear energy is they want to know, well, is it safe? Do I want it in my backyard? So are they safe, and how does the industry overcome that political challenge so that as these small modular nuclear reactors become more prevalent, that means we've got more smaller reactors around the country, right? So nuclear energy is now a distributed energy source. And so how do you guys think about overcoming that political community challenge?
Well, I think the only real way to do it is education. If people understood the physics behind these plants, even the existing plants, and I don't mean even the existing, but the existing plants,
Yeah.
they understood the physics and they understood the safety and they understood the safe track record fully. Uh, I think they would go, wow, I didn't really realize that. But Drew, fear is easy to sell. And there are people who make money selling fear and they go out and do it. And it's been pretty easy to sell fear with us. And you may say, well, that's because you're fearful. Well, you look at, and people often cite 3 Mile Island, and there was so little radiation release there. And certainly no one died, and no one was injured that I know of. We have the lowest death and injury rate of any industry in the world in the nuclear industry. And then some people go on to say, well, what about Chernobyl? Complete meltdown. Well, with all due respect to our Russian friends, we would never have built a plant like that to start with, and we would have, even if we had it. Well, let's say they built it and they asked us to run it, we wouldn't have run it as haphazardly as they did. So there's a lot of fear out there that's unwarranted, unmerited, and I really think the other side, if you will, has done a better job of instilling unreasonable fear in people than we have done at selling the truth. So we've got to get the facts out there to people, because it is safe and it will benefit the whole world.
Yeah, that's it's good to hear. And like I said, I suspect that there's a lot of people that have nuclear energy supplying their electricity needs right now that just don't know it, and that's a good thing.
I mean, it's almost gosh, I've forgotten the statistic exactly, the number of states that excuse me, states that have nuclear facilities in them, current legacy facilities, and the percentage of electricity generally in the US, it's around 24-25% of the electricity produced is produced from nuclear energy.
Yeah.
In some states, like my home state of South Carolina, is I believe we're in the 58, 60 some odd percent of all the electricity is produced by nuclear. North Carolina, huge amount. And you can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
But you're right, a lot of people don't recognize it.
Well, and what about? I mean, so you obviously operate a lot in the policy space, and there's I would imagine a whole lot of regulations around nuclear energy, and probably a lot of it for necessary purposes. But I'm also guessing that there's some challenges there. I know when we look at some of the other energy technologies, clean energy technologies, it can be hard to even develop a solar farm or a wind farm, right? Because oftentimes the environmental regulations have unintended consequences. And so I'm just wondering, like, what does that regulatory process look like, in particular for these newer technologies? If let's say you're one of these new companies, you've got one of these modular, reactors, you want to demonstrate it, you want to get it commercially ready to then, repeat off the manufacturing line and sell into multiple locations in the United States. We won't even get into the world yet, but let's just say the United States. Like, how long does that process take to get from, concept permitting to actually commissioning? And are we getting close to, some of the early ones coming out?
Depends on who you talk to. Yes, we are. To answer the last part of your question, we are getting close. We're getting very close. What we're working on, all these regulations, and there are layers and layers and layers of regulations, which one thing we need to do is streamline the layers of regulations. The other thing we're working on is trying to the extent possible, internationalize the standards that we have to apply from a regulatory perspective. The physics and we're working closely with Canada to do this, but the physics in Canada is the same as the physics in the US or Poland or Czech Republic or wherever. So we're working very closely with Canada on harmonizing regulations, and we're working also in Europe with the European community to harmonize regulations. But going back to, what does it take? Every plant has to be, whether it's a legacy plant or the new technology, has to meet standards set by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is fine, and we applaud and support that. What we are encouraging the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to do is start with a risk-based approach that is applicable to the new technology, not the old technology. all these regulatory agencies, they're people,
Yeah.
and you tend to do tomorrow what you did yesterday because you know what you did yesterday, and you know it either worked or it didn't work. So there is some of the mentality with, well, let's start with the old standards, but the old standards don't really work, and unless we get some clear, clean thinking at the NRC, and I have to say we're in constant contact with them, and we're hearing good things, but we'll have to wait and see what we see. But unless we got an understanding of the benefits and the real risks that may be associated, and we build to those risks around standards that are realistic, uh, it's going to significantly harm the progress of the market.
Hmm.
Now, let me say one more thing because I don't want to confuse the listeners. I referenced a 1 megawatt plant, which is certainly possible. And, probably can be some of the earliest releases in the commercial market will be some of these micro plants, we call them 1 to 3 megawatts. A lot of the plants that are being developed are around 300 megawatts.
Okay.
So, and they're still small, they're still the same walk away safe technology. And you can bank these up to 3 or 4, so you can get to 12, 1500 megawatts at a single site if need be. So these facilities can address a range of needs in the marketplace. One more thing I think is beneficial. There's a lot of talk now about a hydrogen economy coming up, a new hydrogen economy.
Yep.
Hydrogen can be used in transportation fuels that have zero carbon emissions. And one of the benefits of these plants, although they are walk away safe, the fuels burn at a higher temperature. And because they're under lower pressure, there's less danger of those temperatures. But they burn at a higher temperature. So when you get through making electricity, because a lot of this technology is still just turning water into steam and turning a turbine and generating electricity. When you get through doing that, you have leftover heat. You can use that leftover heat to make hydrogen.
Hmm.
And so currently we use natural gas, and I'm still a big fan of natural gas. They supply a huge, huge need in the world. But if we can reduce the carbon footprint even further by utilizing zero emission heat to make hydrogen that can then supply transportation vehicles, think how much better off we're going to be.
Yeah, that sounds like a real opportunity, and the ability to produce electricity from nuclear and also sort of co-produce and have those co-benefits of being able to essentially store it through hydrogen and disperse that throughout the transportation market. I do, as you said, I hear a lot these days about renewable hydrogen, and I guess we really ought to be talking about clean hydrogen to include nuclear. It
Yeah.
seems like, yeah. So let me ask you this, because you mentioned the word, I think you mentioned waste, but obviously nuclear waste has been one of those things that has sort of long plagued the nuclear industry, and and for the longest time it's been a political football that nobody's wanted, but I get the sense that, and read about this and see that the industry is trying to take a different approach here. So would love to hear from your perspective, how is the industry approaching this waste issue, spent nuclear fuel, and is it forever waste, and what do we do with it, and then can we convert it into something useful? Just love to hear sort of where that's going.
Well, let me start by saying the waste problem is not a technical problem. It's not a science problem. It's not a physics problem. It is a political problem. And I would say you can spell political with a capital P, or you can spell it with a small p meaning public relations problem. That's where the problem lies. you're exactly right. Going through decades and decades, if you look at Yucca Mountain, both parties have been roadblocks to saying, well, we can't open Yucca Mountain right now because we might lose a House seat or we might lose a Senate seat. And then you always had Harry Reid in the way, who was gained significant power, obviously in the Senate as leader in the Senate, who was just a absolute no way you're gonna bury this at Yucca Mountain, which everyone agrees is, well, everyone who will objectively look at the science agrees is the perfect place to store waste, a permanent repository. What are we doing now? Currently, the spent fuel rods are on location for the most part, on location at these various plants, very safely stored. But if you're on the safety scale, I'd rather have a permanent repository, certainly than storing it at 92, 93 locations around the country.
Yeah.
We're looking at the possibility of interim storage. And by interim, I mean maybe 100 years or so. That politically is a problem as well. Texas and New Mexico, in Texas and New Mexico, there were had been planned interim storage facilities. Both states have, well, Texas just passed a law rejecting it. New Mexico, not sure whether they passed a law, but their governor there is strongly opposed. So that's the long answer. The short answer, we don't have adequate answers long term for waste storage, and that is a problem. We should be able to deal with that. The good news on some of the new fuel, the new technology fuels, will burn some of the spent waste. And so that's good news. Will it burn enough? It's hard to say at this point. Probably not, but it potentially it could, depending on how the industry grows.
Yeah, that's good because I've heard of some of these companies and basically utilizing spent nuclear fuel and recycling it for for fresh electricity, I'll call it. But yeah, your point about the fact that we're now storing nuclear waste, spent nuclear fuel at 92 facilities as opposed to one that could be Fort Knox safe. It always struck me as an oddity. And to your point about the politics of it is, so instead of having it at one place, we now have it at 92 places, but I'm not sure that people really know that. Again,
No, they don't. And again,
yeah,
we need to educate the public a little better. But every time we try to educate, the fear guys come out, and people listen to them first, unfortunately, and even though they don't have the facts. They don't have the facts with them. Speaking of facts, let me give you something that I think always a perception of something we understand in regular day-to-day life. A 30-foot deep football field can store all the spent nuclear fuel that the United States has ever produced. One football field, 30 feet deep. So, and people say, well, 30 feet deep, that's pretty big. Yeah, well, all the waste we've produced in a 60 plus year history of utilization of nuclear energy, we ought to be able to deal with that. And it's just a political third rail almost.
Yeah, well, I sure hope we can get over it. I mean, I know I recall, one time there was a blue ribbon commission, bipartisan. They were looking at, how do we get over this problem, and they created I think this was under the Obama administration. They created a process whereby states could volunteer because they saw the waste as an opportunity for their economic development and research and their economy. And I know of a couple states that raised their hands, but I think even once they raised their hands, they had some challenges internally, politically, with some folks and maybe some outsiders coming in and opposing it altogether.
A lot of that, a lot of outsiders opposing. And it's funny, Drew, most of these places that raise their hand and say, yeah, we'll take it. They're strong proponents of taking it literally in their backyard,
Yeah.
but there are people hundreds of miles away in the other parts of the state who said, no, you can't do that because we don't want you to. So, yeah. It's a tough issue. It's a tough issue. I wish I had a solution. We're working on it. We have a working group that focuses on this. We have members that do both decommissioning and storage issues, and one of our members ships waste all over the world safely, never had an accident. But still, it's just a very difficult political issue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully, this big push to really address, climate change and produce energy cleaner and cleaner will help us get over that. Because I think, as you well, and I think you share this idea that, every challenge is an opportunity, and so that's a real opportunity for us in the United States and for those states that are willing to step up and take this on. And so, that actually leads me to, one of the opportunities that's kind of been there forever, it feels like, is fusion. I'm going to get the joke wrong, but it's basically, that if you love fusion, just wait another 5 years and it'll still be 5 more years out. Or I'm sure you can tell the joke far better than I, but it's just one of those opportunities that's always around the corner.
Always 5 years out. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, is it 5 years out, or how far out is it? And are we investing enough in research and development at the Department of Energy to get us so that it really is 5 years out?
Well, I'm a realist enough, and I'm old enough to know you put these timelines on things just kind of as a talking point and a sales pitch, but you don't deliver. Unfortunately, I don't know what the timeline, whether it's 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. I think it's much closer. Even in the last 3 or 4 years, I think we have seen significant progress in the scientific community on fusion that we had not seen until now. Mm-hmm. We actually have just recently started one of our working groups to focus on fusion. And the reports are favorable. The reports are good, but that it is a very, very complex science project, if you will. For those who may or may not know, the sun is basically a fusion project.
Yeah.
So, and the fusion where with fission, you split an atom. With fusion, the atom comes together and it's just, I guess, close to a perpetual motion machine as there is, but it continues to feed itself. The problems attendant to that, because the temperatures are, if I even started to mention them, you'd say I was wrong, so I won't mention them, but they're astronomically high. As one person I asked, I said, how hot do you think a fusion reactor would need to be? A fusion reaction, how hot would it be? And the guy said, well, I don't know the number, but wouldn't it be the temperature of the sun? I said, that's exactly right. So you can imagine, trying to put that in a bottle. We've got a lot of challenges, but an awful lot of promises coming from collaboration from around the world.
Yeah, and that's where I've seen, at least a fair amount of benefits is the collaboration around the world. I mean, I had the opportunity, like you, to see a number of the national labs, work with them, and when you see the research that goes on, it's just incredible. And there again, many people don't even know that we have these national labs unless they're in your backyard. But then when they are, you realize how valuable they are, and so the bright minds that we have, the research that goes on, the leadership that we provide internationally, just a big proponent, as I know you are. So and have seen, just seen that technology, not fusion, but seen the research going on around that, and it's just it made me want to go back in time and pick a different career path, right? Because I thought, wow, I never knew that science was so exciting and cool, and I just thought science was being a science teacher, but then you get out there and see the national labs, and you're like, this is amazing.
That's interesting you say that, because as I mentioned in the beginning, when we were talking about education and educating the public, it's really, what is this? How does it work? Uh, One of the things that I have been working on since I took over this position is to help educate the public, particularly kids in schools and elsewhere. I just had a meeting last Thursday uh, with someone who is going to help us uh, get the word out through TikTok and other means of what is this technology? What's it mean? How does it work? How will it benefit people? People don't care too much about what's the science behind something. They want to know if it's safe, obviously. But the main thing they want to know, which fits in with safety, how's this going to benefit me? How's this going to benefit the world? And is my life going to be better or worse because of this? And the honest answers are all positive, but we have to get that in front of people. We have to educate people so that they appreciate and understand those benefits. And so, as you mentioned, wanting to go back and get a science education, that's one of the things we're focused on, because we need a strong workforce to be able to do this work. This isn't something you pick up overnight, whether it's a welding trade or whether it's being a nuclear physicist. You don't pick this up overnight. You have to be highly skilled at what you're doing. So, there's a need to focus more on the front end of the workforce, as well as the supply chain. You think about all the businesses that are involved in supplying the various plants. Concrete, and it has to be very high quality concrete, steel of very high quality. And I could go on and on and on. I just had a call the other day from the Valve Manufacturers Association. They are integrally involved in what we do. Frankly, I never thought about it that much, and so we're going to try and work to help them get the word out as to what they do and the importance. But that supply chain, whether it's a supply chain of material or whether it's a supply chain of intellect and workforce, we have to preserve that. And I think knowing, as you look at the new technologies, knowing there is a future there is going to encourage people.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it really is. I mean, from a supply chain perspective, obviously we, the United States, want to have, as much control as we can over the nuclear energy for national security reasons. But as you mentioned, the supply chain going all the way back, everything from concrete and steel to, nuts and bolts to valves. It's just an incredible economic opportunity for us as we transition to a cleaner energy future.
And the question, Drew, and this is so important, the question is not, is this technology going to develop? Are these plants, facilities, you can call them what you want, are they going to get built? The question is, who's going to do it? Are we going to do it? Or is China going to do it? Is Russia going to do it? Russia's got the lead on us now, certainly in large traditional generation facilities. There are 53 large traditional type nuclear facilities being built around the world. The U.S. isn't involved in a one.
Wow.
And people don't recognize how far behind we are falling, as we're not twiddling our thumbs, but we're not taking the steps forward as fast and as strongly as we need to.
Yeah, I think,
one more statistic there. I was giving a talk oh, I don't know, a couple, 3 years ago, and Secretary of Energy at the time was there, and he made the statement that there is no greater threat to the U.S. security than our falling behind in nuclear development. He wasn't talking about bombs; he was talking about nuclear writ large. And my experience is that you may disagree with direction of an administration, of the direction that a secretary is taking, but they don't just make things up. So, I mean, here's a man who has all the knowledge of energy that you need as a secretary of energy in the president's cabinet, has all the intelligence briefings, and he says this is the number one international security issue America faces. We need to focus on that, and we need to get going.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that international aspect because I want to come back to that. I've got two more questions for you. One is that international
Sure.
question, but maybe before we go there, um, you mentioned cost a number of times, and so one of the challenges with the nuclear industry, prior to the smaller modular advanced technology reactors, right, and they're working on this, right. Every energy industry is working on how do you make energy more affordable, and and so with nuclear energy, I guess the question is, how do we make nuclear energy more affordable? I mean, is it the need to streamline regulations? Um, is it the just having more advanced reactors, therefore more competition? How does the industry council think about that?
Well, yes and yes to your first 2 points. Build more, and you got to have the regulations that are sensible,
Yeah,
and you can build to, but we got to build. You got to be able to sell enough of them. There are two issues. We just did a survey of all our members, and there were two issues that stood out to me. I insisted that we ask the question, "What keeps you up at night?" And most of the questions are fairly technical, but I said, let's see what they say. The number one issue was having fuel known as HALEU that we now get from Russia. Having a supply of fuel. The number two was how do I sell my first 30 units? So you got to be able to sell these units to make them economic. I don't know what the numbers are. It's proprietary, obviously, and it's different for each company. But getting the regulations right, I say it is number one. We don't get the regulations right, nobody's coming to the party. Getting the regulations right, then getting fuel and being able to produce and sell enough of these units to get going and be competitive economically.
yeah,
I think that is doable. I think we will see, because there's so many potential economic benefits to these plants, the modular builds, the walk away safe. I can go on and on. Are the first two going to be cheap? No. But as we start producing them, I think we will see significant reduction in costs, and and everyone in the industry I've talked to, which is most everybody in the industry,
yeah.
says they fully recognize that they have to be competitive cost wise, and they can't go out there and uh, I was going to say every piano sold can't be a Steinway, but they recognize that their costs have to be commensurate with what people can afford and what other fuels and fuel sources can deliver.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And frankly, to your point about the first couple are not going to be all that cost competitive. I mean, that's the case with any industry, as any business person knows. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So last question, and I probably have more as you're talking, but we'll leave that for next time.
But
Um, is international leadership, and when you talked a little bit about international leadership on from everything from fusion research to education, And by the way, this is going to be broadcast and as a part of our series to promote Nuclear Science Week. So I'm so glad that you mentioned education as a key priority. But internationally speaking, there's a lot of talk about this UN COP meeting, the Conference of Parties meeting, UN COP 26, if folks have heard of it, where all the countries get together from around the world. They make commitments to climate change and reducing carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, all of that. This has been a little bit of a sticky wicket, right, for folks politically, and it's kind of the pendulum has swung back and forth. We were in the Paris Agreement, we were out of the Paris Agreement, we're back in the Paris Agreement. So I won't ask you to get into all of that, but from a nuclear industry perspective and the need to have leadership here in the United States, how are you guys thinking about? How are your companies thinking about? Your council thinking about what the U.S.'s role should be in a meeting like that, and not just the meeting, but the follow-up, right? It's easy to get together and make announcements and set aspirational goals, but how are we going to get from here to there, right where we started this conversation?
Well, I think I think meetings like the COP 26 now. I think the meetings like that are important. People from all over the world come to discuss climate issues and how do we reduce our carbon footprint. I think the important part is that some people come with an agenda, and sometimes the agenda does not include nuclear, which is unfortunate because without nuclear, as we talked earlier, without nuclear, you're not going to get there. It's just that simple. No matter how hard you try, you're not going to get there. And I could go in, well, just go into one or 2 points, because with every other non-emitting source, you don't have the reliability that's absolutely necessary. So when you turn the switch on, whether it's a switch in your home or probably as important, an industrial switch.
Yeah.
The power has to be there. It has to be consistent. The cycling has to be, there are a lot of things about electricity that, particularly at industrial facilities, have to be smooth and perfect, put it that way. You can do that with some carbon emitting fuels, but the only non-carbon emitting fuel, perfectly clean fuel, is nuclear that will do that at the current time.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that they embrace the realities of science and realities of the world. I do think it's important to think aspirationally, but I believe that these meetings are more helpful if the scientific reality is embraced, and we can talk honestly and openly without hostility to one technology or the other as to how do we reach these goals. So to that extent, I think these types of meetings are good. And as Winston Churchill said, it's better to jaw than to war. So I think anytime people can get together and do a little jawing, it doesn't hurt. We hope to have a presence there. We were going to go and have physically be there, but we're going to wave the flag. But I think those kind of meetings have their place and they're useful.
Yeah, well, good. Well, let us know what we can do to help, and I think we should end every one of these discussions with a Winston Churchill quote. So
He was a great one.
yeah. Well, Bud, thank you for your time. I know you are extremely busy, and
Well, thank you. I always have time to do something helpful and useful, particularly with you. And it's my honor to be invited to do this. I hope I've given some information that's useful and interesting to your listeners.
no, absolutely. I think this will be really kind of an evergreen kind of conversation, and well, hopefully this conversation will be out of date soon as we advance the nuclear reactors and one day actually get to fusion. But in the meantime, I think it'll be really, really valuable educationally. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so for our viewers, again, my name is Drew Bond. I am the president and CEO of the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions, a free market organization dedicated to promoting solutions for all things climate, energy, and the environment. So again, look for this interview, this Right Voices interview with our special guest, Bud Albright, with the U.S. Nuclear Industry Council. And find us on the web at c3newsmag.com and share us on all your social media channels. Tell your friends about us. We believe technology innovation is good. We believe in energy innovation, and fundamentally, foundationally, economic freedom and free markets can really help us get there. But Bud, you had something to say.
I had one last thing I forgot to tell people. Please visit our website at usnic.org. And we're on the web. We just finished modernizing, updating our web page. And so I think you'll find it helpful. It really goes into all the detail you might want. Drew, I want to compliment you and C3. The work you all do is terrific. Solutions that are going to be found are going to be market-based. If we're to solve this problem, we need to look to the market for long-term solutions. Saying that, we need to partner with governments around the world as well to get us to a robust market position for all the technologies. But we need support initially, but we'll compete in the marketplace soon.
That's a perfect ending, man. We believe in limited government, which doesn't mean no government. It means there's a role for government, and public-private partnerships are critical, especially in early stage research and commercializing technology that's not cheap and has such implications for our economy, our national security. So, well said. So I'm so glad that you mentioned your website. So please do check out the Industry Council's website. And with that, thank you everyone for your time. I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and look for us again at the next Right Voices interview.